Welcome to today's webinar, Important Issues in Small Business Lending. During this 1-hour interactive presentation, our presenter will cover the following: components of fundamental business analysis, what you need to know about financial institutions, rules for lending, fundamental differences between financial institutions and the borrower, how financial institutions underwrite commercial credit requests. The presenter for today's webinar is Jim Lynn. Jim is the principal of the Lynn Group, Incorporated. He was Vice President and Commercial Lending Officer at Maryland National Bank, now part of Bank of America, specializing in small business lending for 7 years. Jim is now a consultant to community financial institutions and has worked with more than 20 financial institutions across the country over the past 15 years. In addition, Jim is an expert witness on commercial and consumer lending issues. Jim has worked on complicated commercial credit cases, as well as cases involving the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Truth in Lending Act, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, and the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. If you have a question that pertains to this presentation, please use the Q&A or chat feature, which is found on the right-hand side of the screen. Jim will do his best to answer your questions during the presentations. We're scheduled to take 3 question and answer breaks during today's presentation. Jim has also asked me to relay a message that he is more than willing to answer questions that may come to you after the conclusion of this presentation. I will send out my email address during the conclusion of the presentation, so that you'll be able to email me directly and I'll be able to pass it on to Jim, and he'll be able to get back to you in a timely manner. Approximately 24 hours after the conclusion of this event, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this webinar. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after this program is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to our distinguished panelist, Jim Lynn. Jim, it is all yours.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And many thanks to all of our participants for joining in today's webinar. Let me just say that I think that a banking relationship is an important investment for many small businesses. I also think that it's a significant component in the growth and development of many small businesses. And an effective banking relationship can only happen when the financial institution and the borrower or small business person understand each other. Yet it's often the case that many small business owners do not have a banking relationship that works for them. So I hope that we'll be able to give each listener today a better sense of how to develop and how to maintain an effective banking relationship, especially a loan relationship. So with that, let me go to the second slide as we have it here, and here's give you a brief overview of small business lending. And as I stated on the slide here, to be successful in managing and operating a small business, competency in several core business skills is essential. First, marketing and sales. Second, management and strategic planning. Third, accounting. Fourth, finance. And fifth, personnel. Now, I know my experience is representative of what happens out there. Many of the small businesses that I have worked with are really a function of their technical expertise. They are a printer, they're a car mechanic, they're an upholsterer, they're an electrician, they're a drywall hanger, they're whatever, they're a carpenter. But when you are running your own business, it's certainly important to have that technical skill around which the business is built, but it's also just as important to have some familiarity with all of these business skills that are required to operate an effective business on an ongoing basis. So with that, let me go into detail on each one of these segments. First, on marketing and sales. Identification of markets for your products and services. I've always said to customers, and I've had a lot of people tell me, just never give up on marketing. It's a constant process of trying to service your existing customers or clients and retain their business, identifying new market opportunities to expand your business, and thinking of new ways to grow and develop your business. If you're like me and I'm running my own small business here, I spend a lot of my time when I'm not actively engaged or involved in a specific business activity of thinking of those issues, and even when I am working on it, I'm sort of thinking of it subconsciously. I'm sure many of our participants are the same. The second point here I have is knowledge of all direct and indirect competitors. If you're a printing company, who are the other printers in your marketplace? And how has the growth and development of the Internet perhaps affected your business? I'd also talk about not just direct competitors, but also indirect competitors. And by that I mean we should see that a McDonald's is a competitor with a food store such as Safeway. They are both in the food business. One has it prepared and one has it not prepared, but nevertheless they are competitors, at least indirect competitors with each other. So it's not only important to see who your direct competitors are, but also your indirect competitors. The third point I have up here is analysis of business entities' own strengths and competitive advantages. How well does a small business person understand the dynamics of the industry in which his or her business operates, and how can a small business person adapt and adjust to changing market conditions? And that's certainly an issue in this day and age, as the market out there is rather unsettled and still is unsettled. It has been, as we all know, for the last couple of years. Industry issues. I would say this, it is a lot easier to be an underperforming company in a good industry rather than be an overperforming company in a bad industry. Industry factors are going to have a significant impact on on your business prospects, but nevertheless, if you are in an industry and you know that it's a difficult industry to be in, such as housing right now, you have to continue to think creatively and imaginatively on how you are going to address the challenges that confront you. A couple of other issues: use of the Internet for identification of new prospects. I'm sure obviously everybody here is online and they are computer literate. That's why they're here. But nevertheless, I like to do Google searches. I like to see if the new prospect that I maybe wanted to call on has a website. There's a lot of, Google is probably the most powerful search engine out there, but there's a lot of ways to get information on prospects that you may want to bring in, at least want to pursue as a potential business opportunity. And last but not least, in my opinion, small business, large business, or anything in between, every business entity should have its own website. I think the yellow pages are nice, but a website enables you to communicate your message, interact with your customers on an ongoing basis, and to me, it demonstrates that you are what I would call a real business. So for those folks, I think it's good to have one, and if you don't have one, I would certainly encourage you to get one. It's also a nice way for other folks to discover your customers, or potential customers. The next slide I have here is on management and strategic planning, budgeting, and control. Where has the business entity been? Where is it now? And most important, where is it going? First thing I would like to look at is financial statements on the business entity. I will discuss that below, or in a couple of slides in advance. Same with the cash budget. It's also known as a checkbook accounting. I will discuss that in a few minutes. Pro forma financial statements. Now, what I mean by pro forma financial statements is, where do you expect the company to be going in the future? What is your game plan for the next year or 2 years, and what would the financial picture of your company look like? What resources would you need, and how would you acquire those resources? To have not only historical financial statements, but also what we expect the company to look like going forward is in essence of like it's part of what I would point up in the next item here of the business plan. Every business should have a business plan. I think one of the challenges of small businesses is that they don't. What I call it's no plan is the plan. But we like small businesses. I think it's best for all of them to have a business plan, and not just a lot of people will have it quote in their head, but it's not bad to put it down in pen and paper just to see where you are and most important, where you're going and what you need to get there. Planning is important. I always think of for all of our football fans out there, if you look at head coaches on the sideline when you're watching the game on TV, head coaches most of the time have the headset on, so they're talking to the people upstairs, and they also are looking at their play chart. And so when they get into a situation in a game, and they probably have 2 or 3 plays that they may call in that specific game situation. But they're not going to make it up when they're sitting there, during the game. They're going to have made that up before they get to the game in the first place, and it's just a matter of picking the one of the 2 or 3 plays that they have selected for that situation, which one they think would work the best at that point in time. I think in a business plan, it's sort of the same thing. We're not just planning from week to week, but we're planning from month to month and from year to year. And to put it down on paper and to look forward, I think, is a very important concept or a very important element in the growth and development of a business. So let me go to the next slide here, accounting, one of our favorite subjects. Just out here, timeliness and accuracy of information so the owner can approximately monitor and manage the business. The timely filing of all federal, state, and local income taxes. As a lender, people who had current financial information were certainly, there was a difference between those type of businesses and those businesses that didn't have it. It does, again, it's part of the process of managing a business. Part of that is going to roll into the bookkeeping function, but having balancing your checkbook, reconciling your monthly checking account statements, filing all your tax returns, your sales tax returns, your unemployment tax returns, your Form 941 on a federal level, and so forth. That's extremely important. It's just a mechanical process of managing a business, but it's a very critical process. Fourth I have here is finance. Pricing of the product, service, managing cost of production, profitability and efficiency analysis, cash flow, job cost analysis, management of accounts receivable, payables, and inventory. We've got a lot of things in there. But there are a lot of the elements of like how is a business, all the monetary factors associated with everything that you do. And some products and services that you may sell have higher markups than other products and services. I know in my own experience as an expert witness that has a higher market value than when I am consulting to a small community financial institution. It's just the way it is, but you have to know what value each of your product or each of your services may have out there in the marketplace. When we talk about management as a procedure for extending trade credit, if you are in the business of extending trade credit, how do you do that? You should, first of all, take an application from a prospective person who wants to get credit from you. I always recommend that you get a bank reference, at least find out whether if there's any overdrafts in the prospective customer's checking account or savings account. A bank will tell you that if they say words like it's a satisfactory account, that's what they're saying to you, that it is. Of course, you have to get permission from the customer to get a bank reference, but they are telling you that if it's a satisfactory account, it's basically read that as no overdrafts, which is a good sign. You can always get a Dun & Bradstreet report on a business. And a Dun & Bradstreet report, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is similar to a personal credit report, except the Dun & Bradstreet report is for a business and a personal credit report is for an individual. But it's basically the same thing. You have to subscribe to Dun & Bradstreet to get them. But if you are dealing with a lot of customers who need trade credit, and that's a normal and customary part of the industry in which you operate, you need to know the rules of like how to extend trade credit and how to protect yourself. Management of accounts receivable. If you are extending trade credit, the object of the game is obviously to collect your receivables as quickly as you can. I would compare it to 7-Eleven or a Circle K or any kind of a convenience store out there. That's cash and carry. They have inventory. You pay for it in cash or with a credit card, and then you walk out the door with the product that you've purchased. They don't have receivables, so if you have to have receivables, it's probably the best idea is to keep them to a minimum if you possibly can. The lower the amount of receivables, the more efficient your business is going to run. So the idea is there's a lot of costs associated with receivables. There's a cost of maintaining the accounts receivable management system. There's a cost of financing. If you have receivables and you have to borrow money to finance those receivables, there's a cost of borrowing. You also have customers who either do not pay on time or they do not pay at all. So that's another risk in managing receivables. But in any event, some businesses, it's part of their industry. It's how the industry works. You have to explain trade credit. The idea here is to do it as efficiently and effectively as you can. All right, the next slide here we got is personnel. Finding, hiring, and retaining quality employees. I always look, and especially in a small business, you look at the experience of the management team, the depth and breadth of the management team, the management succession plan. They are important issues. Where's our business going? What managers, what people are coming along? What are our strategic needs? How are we evolving? How are we developing? What people do we need here, not only in the management team, but really in the sub-management team, right down to the from A to Z in the organization. But personnel is a key issue in any small business, particularly because you have many people who wear several hats at once. So each of these 5 skills that I've described here are important variables that successful small businesses have managed. As I have seen in my experience, successful small businesses often have a good banker, they have a good accountant, they have a good lawyer, they have a good financial consultant, and perhaps they have a good marketing consultant. And the combination of all of those specific skills can help the small business person put them in a position where they can make informed decisions, informed judgments to move their business along, to grow and develop it properly. So with that, I think I'm at the next slide, which is to use that chat or feature to submit your questions. So I will take a moment break here to see if we have any questions, and we'll pick it up from there.
Jim, I have a question here. During your brief presentation, you touched on a couple key issues, but you didn't talk about insurance. Would you advise a small business to have key person life insurance to mitigate the risk of someone passing away and the business not being as successful as it previously was?
That's a good point, Matt. In a small business, you have a lot of key employees, people wearing several hats. And if you have some key employees, it's not a bad idea to have, key person life insurance on them. So at least you have some money that comes in, and if there is, quote, an event under the policy. But to have that is important. Oftentimes, you will find in a credit relationship, if you don't have it, people like me as a lender will encourage you to get it or even require you to get it, because we have that same concern as a lender, because a business without a key person is going to be a different business. And that different business can go in several different directions, and at least in the short term, many of them are not positive. So we're looking for at least some cushion to help the business along as it adapts and adjusts to a changing reality.
I'm not seeing any more questions right now, so why don't we move on to the next presentation of content. And anyone out there who has a question, we're going to stop here in a couple more slides, so please feel free to send us in a question over the chat or the Q&A feature.
And let me just add one more point there, Matt, and thinking of key person life insurance. You could also have key person disability insurance. Now, it is often the case, or it can happen, where a person does not pass on, but the person is disabled in one way, shape, or form, often by a traumatic accident or whatever. The same issue applies. The person is not available or cannot work. It could be a permanent basis. It could be an extended period, 6 months, a year, or whatever. To have disability insurance for that person is a good thing for them too, and it also can help the business along, in the absence of that individual. So it's good for both parties, I think. All right? So let me go into the next one, the business analysis. Okay, components of a fundamental business analysis. I have several elements of that up here: revenue analysis, expense structure, profitability, liquidity, efficiency, leverage, cash flow, the cash budget. Not good, it's got a lot of stuff. Let me take them one at a time if I can. Let me see. Whoops, I went one too far. Let me go back here. Revenue analysis. I'm looking at what's selling, what is not. Revenue is probably, in many respects, the most important thing you do. You're in business to provide a product or provide a service or produce a product and sell a product or sell a service. And the question is, what are you selling? What can you sell? What is selling? What is not? Again, you get back to never letting up on marketing. But what I'm always thinking about again is how do I retain my best customers and can I add good new customers to my business? Expense structure, a lot of times this depends on your industry that you're in. If it's a fixed cost structure, what do we call a fixed cost structure, as opposed to a variable cost structure? A fixed cost structure is much more risky than a variable cost structure. Let me give you an example. If you're flying an airplane that is full from New York to California, it costs just about as much to fly that plane, whether it's full with passengers or there's 2 passengers in it. The fixed cost of operating the whole thing is virtually, it's not significantly different. So what's the idea here is to get the planes full. So you have businesses that are like airlines that are probably have the highest fixed cost structure, one of the highest in all industries out there in the marketplace. Some are much more variable. They're more dependent upon labor, and labor can be either increased or decreased as a function of time, depending on demand for product or services. So those businesses that are more fixed cost oriented are higher risk, generally speaking. Those that have more variable costs are more are less risky. But again, this is more or less a function of the industry in which you operate. And the difference between revenue and expense is going to be your profitability. It's going to be a function of how well you manage your expenses, how efficient you are in managing your expenses, as well as how much can you generate in revenues. Liquidity, I'm usually looking for how much cash flow do you have, how much long-term capital do you have invested in the firm. The more long-term capital you have invested in the firm, generally speaking, the better off you are, that you have cash in the bank at all times. Efficiency, again, it just gets back to something we talked about before, how efficient you manage your receivables if you have that business, or how efficient you manage the inventory that you have. And to some extent, how efficient you manage your payables. You have bills that are due for inventory that you may have purchased, or for just normal operating expenses, the phone, the computer, and all those kind of things, payroll. How well do you manage the bills, the cash flow on both ends? That money, I should say the receivables that you have, the inventory that you have, and the payables that you have. Leverage, which is good. The leverage is what we're usually talking about is how much debt do you have supporting the assets in your business, as opposed to how much equity do you have. I'll never argue against equity as a lender. The more equity you have, the less risk that you have. The equity can come in many forms. It can come in stockholder loans. It can come in an equity cash injection. But it helps to support the long-term growth and viability of the firm. It stabilizes the firm. That's why it's good. Now, I also understand that there's 2 advantages of debt as opposed to equity. First, interest on debt is tax deductible. There's not an interest on equity. It's usually a dividend, and a dividend, even if it was paid, is not tax deductible. So your cost of capital, generally speaking, for debt is lower than it is for equity. But another great advantage of debt is that it is contractual. It doesn't dilute the equity interest in the firm. So if you can access capital via debt as opposed to equity, you can maintain more control over your firm. If you get more equity in your firm from an outside investor, that outside investor will demand a higher rate of return and also will have a more profound and significant impact on the management of your firm. So my experience with small business people is that they like to keep the ownership circle as tight as they possibly can, not invite outsiders to invest. I understand that, but one way to build equity is by profitability and maintaining profits in your firm. So, but I just wanted to point out the difference between debt and equity and the implications of both. Next, we have cash flow. That is the fact how much cash does the business entity have, and does the business entity have sufficient cash at all times to meet its ongoing obligations? It's extremely important. I have received, when I was in lending, I did receive on more than one occasion a call from a prospect, not a borrower, but a prospect, saying, I have payroll tomorrow and I don't have enough cash for payroll. Can I borrow money from you? Well, yeah, we have money to lend, but probably not for that. And my point is that if you didn't discover that you were running out of cash until today and you had payroll tomorrow, I mean, again, it gets back to that planning concept that I was talking about before and with the football coach. I mean, that play wasn't on the play chart, for sure. So the point is here is that it places a premium, again, and you're managing and operating a small business, to think forward, to think ahead, and not think in quote, emergency situations. Look, emergencies are going to happen, things can occur, things can happen. I understand that out there. But you should try to, a good plan will try to anticipate as many events or outcomes that possibly can happen, and at least you have thought through, at least in a preliminary way, how you would address any type of outcome that could occur. All right? And last, we got the cash budget, and I have a slide for that. We got sources of cash, and the next one will be uses of cash. Where does cash come from? Again, equity investment by owner. We always love that as lenders. Positive cash flow from operations. You are taking more money in terms of revenues than you are spending out in terms of expenses associated with those revenues. You can always borrow from a bank, a finance company, or a factor. Let me just take, I think everybody has a good concept of what a bank is, but let me try a finance company and a factor. A finance company is, there are several out there. I can think of GE Finance. There's several of them out there who will lend money to businesses, small businesses. Finance companies, generally speaking, charge higher rates of interest than do banks. If you have your druthers, you want to find a way to become bankable, because the cost of capital at a bank is going to be a lot cheaper than the cost of capital at a finance company, generally speaking, and that is especially true for short-term assets such as investment in receivables and inventory. A factor is a company that will buy your accounts receivable for a price, give you cash up front, and then as they are collected, the factor is in essence paid back. But you sell your receivables to a factor at a discount. And if you have a $100 amount that is owed to you, you may sell it to a factor for $90. And when the factor collects the $100 from your customer, he remits $90. Well, he remits $90 back to you, and he keeps $10 in profitability for himself. So a factor is a way to sell your receivables. It's a hybrid of financing, but it does exist out there. Borrowing from others, OPM, or other people's money. There's lots of ways to borrow money from other people. Sometimes you have what we call accrued expenses. You've incurred the expense, but you haven't yet paid it yet. The phone bill isn't due until the 20th of the month, and you have the cash available to pay it now, but why pay it now until might as well wait till the 20th to pay it. So there are, in the normal course of running a business, excuse me, there are sources of funding out there that normally do occur. One of the biggest actually is payroll. Often we have people who are paid every 2 weeks, but there's usually a week lag. So people who may get paid this Friday, that is for the pay period that ended last Friday. So the work that they're doing today, which they contributed, productivity to the company, they won't get paid for that for another couple of weeks. So in effect, your employees often are unwitting sources of capital for your firm. That's OPM. That's included in there. As I mentioned before, more efficient management of accounts receivable and inventory. You can, the lower you can keep those amounts, the more that frees up cash. You can use the cash for other purposes to manage your business more effectively and efficiently. A sale of a non-current asset. We sell current assets like inventory. That's a normal course of production, but a normal course of business. But a sale of a non-current asset, such as a car or some asset that has for scrap value or whatever, it's a minor issue, but it is a source of cash. And finally, a financial lease, which is, you see that often with vehicles, trucks, and so forth, that you can enter into a lease agreement rather than to borrowing agreement. It's a hybrid on the same thing. You get the benefit of the asset. It's what we call a capital lease, but you are paying lease term. You're paying amount every month, which is similar to a car payment. And at the end of the lease period, you pay $1 and you have the car or something. Something along those lines. So they are the sources of cash, and hopefully your sources on an ongoing basis exceed your uses. And here are the uses of cash. Again, you could have negative cash flow from operations, which, again, if that's an issue, that's something that is not sustainable over the long run. But you can go through periods, especially in this day and age, where you're going to have negative cash flow from operations, and what you're trying to do is stay in business as long as you can. And that's, yes, clearly when equity capital comes into play and can help you get you through a difficult period. Payment of, again, most of the rest of this is paying bills, payment of accounts payable, payment of accrued expenses, which are, again, the phone, heat, light, power, all that kind of stuff. Lease payments, again, they're associated with the leases that you may have for specific assets. You're purchasing a fixed asset. It can be any type of property, plant, or equipment. You're investing in more accounts receivable or inventory. You pay a dividend, or you make loan payments. I put loan payments on there at the bottom for a specific reason. As a banker, I know, even though I probably have collateral interest in some of your assets and so on and so forth, but I also know that in a practical matter, the bank usually gets paid last. Now, but in any event, when I make a loan to you, I like to get paid on time, according to the terms of the loan. But nevertheless, I know as a practical matter, when you think about it, you're going to make payroll before you pay me. If you're on a past due list for a little while, you can rectify that, but it's not a sustainable issue over a long period of time. But they are the sources and uses of cash. All right, let me go one more here before we go to a Q&A. Slow down in cash generation. What could happen? Seasonality can do it. If you are a toy manufacturer right now, you're thinking of one thing: Christmas. Now, maybe 90 degrees where you are. It certainly is 90 degrees where I am here in Maryland. But any toy manufacturer out there is thinking of Christmas, and what they have to be doing, since most toys, or 50% of toys, I believe, are sold in the month of December, they have to build inventory between now and December and they have to invest a lot of money into labor and into material and into storage for all of those toys that they are manufacturing that are going to be sold in that period. So that will slow down cash generation. A growth of a business. If you are growing a business, it's not uncommon that the level of accounts receivable and inventory increase faster than the level of sales. It happens a lot. It's very typical. Slow down in collection. If you have your accounts receivable slow down. I mean, people used to pay in every 20 days or 30 days. Now they're paying in every 40 days. Well, the amount of your receivables, all those things going to be equal, is going to increase. Well, if you think in terms of a balance sheet, if your asset increases, then some liability has to increase or another asset has to decrease in order to offset that. So it is a use of cash and slows down your cash generation. And the last issue are internal operating issues. They could be personnel issues. They could be efficiency issues in your production cycle. They could be almost anything. But they can have a negative impact on your cash generation as a business. So with that, I think I'm at another question and answer period, right? I think I am. Oh, excuse me. I got two more slides to go, I think. One more slide. You should also know, on this slide here, there's a big difference between growth and managed growth. financial institution has a strong business for business entities that demonstrate managed growth, which is we know what we're doing. We're not out for the quick buck. We're playing for the long haul. We're not doing silly and crazy things. We are growing and developing our business as in accordance with a specific game plan. That's a positive sign to me as a lender. Again, a banking relationship is an investment by a small business person. A banking relationship is a source of capital for a small business. And that source of capital can be a significant source of capital for a small business. And to grow and nurture and develop a banking relationship by the small business person nurtures and grows their business. Industry averages, you always wonder how you're doing, and you sort of say compared to who or compared to what. In the banking industry, if a bank is a bank is a bank, you compare yourselves to another bank. If you're McDonald's, it's certainly fair to compare yourself to Wendy's or to Burger King or any of those, similar stores. How are we doing compared to other businesses in our industry? I think there's a lot of information out there that's a bit more available now than has been before with computers, running search engines to see what, trying to get some industry data and industry averages. A lot of times there are trade associations that publish the same type of information, and to get that and to try to determine how you're doing compared to your peers, it's always a good practice to pursue. And last use of the Dun & Bradstreet report, as I mentioned before, if you're a small business or a large business or really anything in between, there is a Dun & Bradstreet report on you, and businesses who are looking at you to approve you for credit, especially trade credit, often access Dun & Bradstreet reports, and they're going to be a function of how you pay your bills. Just like a personal credit report is the same thing. You have to see a Dun & Bradstreet report as your corporate or your business credit report. And so there is an incentive for you to keep your bills current, especially your bank current, so that you can access more capital. And with that, I think we have ourselves a Q&A session. So here we go.
Yeah, Jim, a question for you that came in through the queue. During the financial crisis, let's say 2008 until present, you just during this last presentation of content went over a lot of the things that a business owner needs to be aware of to properly manage their company. Where have you seen people kind of overextending themselves or getting into trouble with the things that you talked about: revenue, cash flow, long-term capital, payables, leverage, the debt to equity ratio? Where were people really getting in trouble, and where do you foresee people will be getting in trouble in the years to come?
I say, again, I said never argue against equity. Equity is the war chest for tough times. So the more equity that you have in a firm, the better off you are, all other things being equal. Because if you have money to, again, you should be running your business efficiently. If there is not sufficient demand for your product or your service, you do have to cut back labor. Sometimes they are painful and difficult choices that you have to make, but you got to do it. But sometimes you got to be thinking, this may turn around in a month or two. If we lay this person off, can we get him or her back in a month or two? If it's more than that, if it's a longer period of time, the person obviously is, they have issues too, and they're trying to, locate themselves to get their own situation squared away. But my point is, the more equity that you have, the better off you are in a period like this. And that's, so I like people and I like businesses who really, even in the good times, they don't, they still manage the same way. They're not out, they're managing efficiently, they're managing effectively, they're watching all those things. It's just as more difficult in a period like now. And this has been prolonged. This has been, clearly 2 years plus that we've had, really challenging economic times. But the business, the best, I said it's better to be a good business in a bad industry. it's better to be a bad business in a good industry rather than a good business in a bad industry. If you're a bad business in a good industry, you may be able to hold on a little bit longer if there is not industry cyclicality. But if you are, but nevertheless, I would say the biggest issue is having equity, having long-term support for your business, because you'd like to think, and most people, if they're like me, you're just totally committed to your business and trying to grow and develop and maintain it. And the other thing you should be thinking of is trying to be creative and imaginative to manage your business, to keep it afloat so that you can get, hopefully, better times are ahead, and you come out on the other side. Remember, if you're a stronger business, all other things being equal, there's still a demand for your product or service, but if there is not as many participants in the industry because a lot of the financially weaker entities have left the industry, there may be more opportunities for you. And the biggest difference between a sound business entity and an unsound one is probably the level of equity that they have. So that was probably the one I'd focus in on the most.
Okay, and another question is, you talked about trade credit during the last presentation of content. Are there specific issues that small business owners should look for when dealing with trade credit, and how should they structure their contractual agreements with relation to trade credit?
Usually it varies, but some will give you a credit line. It's almost like a credit card, if you will. You can come and buy stuff from them, and how much you can have at any point in time. So it's going to be a function of each individual entity, how much they will give you, how much credit they will give you. But again, if you have a good credit history, you're more likely to get trade credit than if you don't. You're almost acting like a bank, if you will. So again, each one is going to be different. But again, if you are a sound business entity and can demonstrate that to trade creditors as well as to banks, you're going to be much better off.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any more questions. So, as I said, if you have questions, please continue to submit them to us via the chat or the Q&A. But Jim, why don't we move on to the next section of content?
Yeah, what do you need to know about financial institutions? I mean, what are those banks all about? Well, I'm a guy who's been on the inside for a long time, so let me tell you. First of all, I got a definition of a loan up here. An extension of credit by the financial institution to the borrower, evidenced by the note and the related loan documents. The note and related loan documents state the terms and conditions that govern the credit extension. The note and loan documents also define the rights and responsibilities of the financial institution as well as the borrower. Now, next one, OPM equals OPR, other people's money equal other people's rules. So I sort of can, think about this when you're giving your teenage son or daughter the car keys. I mean, it's my car and here are my rules and here's what you got to do. If it's my money, I'm doing the same thing, or if it's my bank's money, I'm doing it on behalf of the bank. If the financial institution extends credit to a borrower, the borrower must comply with all the terms and conditions that govern the credit extension. As a lender, I'm looking for my borrower basically to do the following. I want them to pay me as agreed, which in other words is in accordance with the terms and conditions of the note. I want them to provide me with financial information as required. I'm only asking for financial information that they should have anyway, excuse me, in order to manage their business. Delayed financial statements are always bad news. I mean, it's almost inevitable. Customers who have their financial statements for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2009, they should have them by now. But a lot of times when you don't see them coming in until September or October, you know that this is probably bad news and it's also delayed. The next thing I want you to do is maintain the collateral property that I've lent against in good working order. And finally, I want you to keep the hazard insurance current. That's in the loan documents itself. I don't want to be there with the fire marshal as he's hosing down the remaining embers of my collateral and then saying, gee, I wonder if they paid the hazard insurance or not. So do those four things, and I'm going to be happy. Now, the bank's primary objective, a lot of people think that the bank's primary objective is to make money. That is true, but it's not. That's a secondary objective. The primary objective, in my opinion, is to preserve and protect my principal. I mean, I want them. I gave you money. I want money back plus the interest on that money. So I want to do everything I can to preserve and protect the principal that I have extended to you in the form of credit. And the second objective is to earn a fair and reasonable rate of return. All right, we got some rules of lending here. Lenders want to serve their borrowing customers, but what are the rules under which lenders operate? First of all, the financial institution is risk averse. The goal of the financial institution is make loans while minimizing its risk exposure with each loan. Accordingly, in order for a borrower to qualify for credit, he or she must be deemed to be creditworthy by the financial institution. Now, what is risk? Risk simply is uncertainty of outcome. If foresight were always 20/20 instead of hindsight, risk would be eliminated. It's not. It's out there, and what we're trying to do is recognize risk, manage risk, and mitigate risk to manage risk, and lessen the impact of potential risk on our loans. How much risk is acceptable in an average loan? Generally speaking, the financial institution should be at least 95% certain at the outset that the borrower will consistently make his or her loan payments in a timely manner. So if you're out there and you're applying for a loan for a bank, you ought to be thinking, am I 95% sure, and doing an objective self-analysis, am I 95% sure that I think I can make these loan payments on time that would be associated with this specific loan for which I'm applying? Because that's the way they're going to be looking at you. With a commercial finance company, the probability of payment is slightly lower, perhaps as low as 90%, but the interest rate charged by the finance company is higher to compensate it for the perceived increase in the risk profile of the borrower. So you're going to pay a higher interest rate if you're perceived to have more risk. Look at if the only source of capital that's available to you to finance receivables or inventory or perhaps fixed assets is a finance company, just know what you want to do is use that as an interim step if you possibly can, and get yourself to a bank. And the simple reason is that bank financing is going to be cheaper than finance company. That's the way it is. Okay, next we got another rule here. Bank is a financial intermediary. That means the bank is lending its depositors' money to its borrowers. In other words, the bank is entrusting borrower with grandma's deposit, and the terms and conditions of the note and related loan documents are designed to preserve and protect grandma's money that is invested in a specific loan. So I'm out there as an advocate for grandma. I know I can tell grandma, don't worry, your deposit is insured up to now $250,000 at the bank. That's fine, but the FDIC is out there looking out for grandma too when they come in and audit a bank, and they're looking at the quality of the loan portfolio and what's going on out there. So the fact of the matter is we have to think of our depositors' money that is invested in these loans. Also, it's true in virtually all financial institutions that I know. There's a lot of customers who have more than $250,000 on deposit, and anything over $250,000 is not insured by the FDIC. So you have the good faith and credit of the bank, and standing behind that. And one way to maintain the good faith and credit of the bank is to invest in safe and sound loans and do everything you can vigilantly to preserve and protect the interests of your depositors, or as I said here, interest of grandma. If a loan applicant is deemed to be not bankable at one financial institution, is often the case, with emphasis on often, the case that the applicant is not bankable with any competitive institution. Generally speaking, most banks look at the world the same way. They have loan policies to guide them. As I mentioned in the next point here, all financial institutions operate under the same rules, principles, and concept. They all have loan policies. So generally, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference from one bank to another in terms of the way they look at credit. Some smaller banks seem to do better with smaller businesses than larger banks, but that's not always the case. The point is that you want to go out and look at several banks and shop several banks, just like you would shop for a car. Go to several dealerships and see what's out there and what you can get. But generally speaking, the rules are the same from one bank to another. The selection criteria for small business person: look for a financial institution based on its ability to understand your business and on its ability to service your needs. Convenience is certainly always a helpful element too, but it's not necessarily the most critical one. You're looking for what what business or what bank can really talk to me and understand what business I'm in and how it can respond to my business and to my needs. Okay, what do we got here? Financial institutions versus borrower. One thing you got to just know, and a lot of bankers don't understand this either, but I will tell you, there are fundamental, what I call institutional differences between the bank and the borrower. The amount of the loan and the amount of the down payment. If you come in for a car loan and the car costs $30,000, you know, I'm probably going to ask you to make a down payment on the car. Let's just say it's going to be $5,000. And this could be for commercial as well as retail. So you get a $25,000 loan and you put $5,000 down, you have your car. But I don't want to hear you asking for like $50,000. So I'm saying, why do you need $50,000 to buy a $30,000 car? You may say I need to put gas in it or something, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, you know, the amount of the loan should correspond to the need that you have, and I'm also looking for amount of down payment. A lot of people like 100% financing. I understand that, but a bank is going to, again, trying to mitigate its risk, is going to try to reduce its risk by looking for a down payment so that you have some investment in the asset. Collateral, secured versus unsecured. We'd all love to have unsecured debt. The fact is, unsecured debt is a lot more expensive than secured debt, but that's one thing that mitigates towards secured. But yes, if you do not pay, I do have rights on the loan documents to repossess the collateral. But in any event, secured debt, as I said, is lower. The price of it is lower, and what we're looking for is, you know, to preserve and protect our interest. Again, to preserve and protect our principal, and security does help. Personal guarantees, always a fun one. And by that I mean, if you have a business, and a business is a corporation, or it's a limited liability company, or some other type of incorporated business entity, the liability of the business entity is limited to just that business entity. So often what banks ask for is the guarantee of a spouse or, you know, someone else that can support the credit on a personal basis. So if the loan goes into default, I have recourse against the personal assets of a guarantor. Often that guarantor is a spouse, and the reason that it's a spouse is because the assets of a married couple are usually held in joint tenancy. They can be separate, but they may often are held in joint tenancy. And if they're held in joint tenancy, I do not have the right to go after those assets to satisfy the indebtedness. So one way to do that is to get a personal guarantee of the spouse. A lot of it, it's always a contentious issue. They certainly make the loan safer, but, you know, they're giving up something. Hopefully they're getting something. If you borrow the money and you're able to grow and develop your business, that means that you increase your own personal wealth position, and that is the payback to the personal guarantor. That the loan serves a beneficial and useful purpose. So it's always a contentious issue, but it's one of those that is out there. The term of the loan. People like longer terms rather than shorter terms. Usually a bank is risk-averse, is going to want a shorter term. They're not going to want a 10-year car loan. They're going to probably want a 5 to 7-year car loan because the useful life of the car is not 10 years, it's 5 to 7. Subordination of debt, especially loans by shareholders, usually want a debt instrument that is controlled by a shareholder to be paid out after a loan to the bank. So what we're going to say is generally you can pay interest on that loan, but you can't pay any principal back until the bank's loan is satisfied. Loan terms and conditions, including financial covenants, a lot of times we will tell you that in order for the loan to remain in good standing, not only do you have to make the loan payments as agreed, but you also have to demonstrate that the financial health and condition of the company it remains acceptable to the bank. But there's not been what we call in the trade a material adverse change in the status of your business. So there are things that are always we can have differences on too. Provision of financial information on an ongoing basis. Again, I'm never going to ask you for information that you shouldn't already have. So We're just asking for stuff that you should have. A lot of times it can be contentious. And last but not least is pricing. Everybody wants prime or something less than prime, and we may try to charge something more than prime. You can haggle over that too. Some elements here are deal breakers. If you're looking for a mortgage loan, for example, a mortgage loan is just going to be a secured loan, and if you want an unsecured loan to buy a house, you just really nobody out there that's just going to do it. So some of these things are just not even worth discussing. I mean, the bank will walk away from it. Some things are negotiable. Again, you're trying to cut your best deal, and again, to some extent, it's shopping around and seeing what you can get. But it's just noting that there are these institutional differences between the two sides. Okay. So with that, I think I'm back to a Q&A session. You got any there, Matt?
I don't have any right now. Why don't we just move on to the presentation of content since we're butting up against the 3 o'clock hour here.
I should be able to get through this in a few minutes. It may go in a wee bit over time, but let me roll through it. How a financial institution underwrites a commercial credit request. Lending is an art. It's not a science. And no two loans are exactly alike. A critical issue in one loan proposal, like inventory management, may be non-existent or irrelevant in another, a loan for real estate purposes. To some extent, we try to make a science and art by putting some standards in there, like a minimum FICO score on a personal basis, that kind of thing. But again, it's still an art. Even on our retail side, it's still an art. And when I say retail, I'm talking about consumer loans or personal loans. Object of credit analysis is to understand the borrowing purpose and the loan applicant's rationale for the loan request. Does it make sense? Is there an economic rationale or justification for the loan request? Identify the salient issues in the loan request. Are the issues interconnected or interrelated? Again, is the loan request consistent with something that's in the business plan? It's appropriate. It's something that makes some sense. I'm always going to look at the risk associated with the proposed loan and try to figure out how to address or mitigate each risk element. Identify the primary, secondary, and tertiary repayment source. I can tell you the primary is always going to be cash flow from operations. We want cash flow to come into the business on an ongoing basis to make those loan payments on time. If secondary is going to be usually collateral, and the tertiary is usually going to be something like personal guarantees. But I would say here, let me just stop and make sure if you are having some problem and you can see some storm clouds on the horizon, if they haven't happened already, the best thing to do is to go in and tell your bank you're having some problems. Credibility is a precious commodity. Eventually, if you're hoping that it's going to turn out the best, obviously the bank is hoping it's going to turn out the best for you. But if you see storm clouds on the horizon and you're not sure that that you may be able to make your loan payments, next month or 2 months or 3 months, and you need to restructure or you have to do something, the best thing to do is to go in and honestly interact with your banker and tell that banker this is where I stand and this is why I stand it, and hopefully to say here's what I expect to happen and here's where I'm going. But being proactive on that situation, just like with foreclosures and residential properties, being proactive is the best thing that you can possibly do under those circumstances. All right? I want to get back to estimating the future cash flow available to service the proposed debt and assess the level of variability associated with the future cash flow. Fine. And the loan application is acceptable. Structure a loan proposal that minimizes the interest of both of, maximizes the interest of both the lender as well as the loan applicant. Oops, got the typo there. Not a big deal. Okay, number 22. Analysis of secondary repayment source. I'm going to look at collateral. I'm going to try to get an appraisal of the collateral to find out how much it's really worth. Rights of the bank and responsibilities of the borrower with regard to collateral is defined in the note and the rights of the bank and responsibilities of the borrower with regard to collateral is defined in the note and related loan documents. I'm talking about maintaining the collateral, good working order, and the need for insurance as I described before. the tertiary guarantors, and if I'm asking for personal guarantors, I'm going to probably ask for, I will ask for a personal financial statement and a Form 1040 for each guarantor. How much personal cash flow is available to service the business loan? Sometimes you could have a spouse who's totally unrelated to the business, who is working, has a professional position that's totally unrelated to the business. He or she could generate surplus cash flow that can help to pay the business loan, which is good. That always helps. They add value to a loan. A personal credit report, I'm going to pull that for each guarantor that's out there. It is often the case that personal credit, people manage their personal credit like they manage their business credit. So it's good to maintain your personal credit standing if you are asking for a commercial loan. It comes into play not only consumer loans, but also commercial loans. And self-guarantees, as we mentioned before. Okay, other sorts of strengths for credit extension, loan covenants or conditions. We talked about that, as well as subordination of debt. And last but not least, the use of consumer credit for commercial purposes. I see this a lot. Cheap debt out there right now. If you can refinance your personal mortgage rates are as low as they've ever been. If you can refinance it and take cash out of it, and put it into your business in form of equity, or reserve it to inject into your business as a form of equity, that's always helpful. A home equity line of credit can serve the same purpose, and it is also relatively cheap financing. And last but not least, you could have a couple of credit cards in the drawer, or a personal line of credit to serve the same purpose. So what you'll find often is that small business people use personal credit tools, such as a personal mortgage or home equity line of credit, and credit cards or a personal line of credit to finance a business. It's not uncommon. It's done every day. But if you can access credit on a personal basis and reserve it so you can have it available for the company or for your business entity, that's a good thing. And with that, Matt, I'll flip it back to you. If there's any questions or whatever, I'm glad to take them.
Thanks, Jim. We do have a question from Soren who asks, Jim, please comment on the bank versus surety claim against receivables on bonded contractors.
Okay. It's a bonded contract. A lot of times you have surety bonds. You see this a lot in construction industry, that you can't get liens on receivables, or it also happens with government receivables too, that you can take a lien, but the impact or power of that lien is somewhat limited. Let's put it that way. And so it happens out there. It is a constraint of the industry. It's the way it works. Banks who understand the industry in which you are operating will understand that too, and they can find other ways to try to mitigate, to address that risk issue. The risk issue is the same, but again, you see it with government receivables, and you see it with contractors' receivables, building contractors' receivables, that it's hard to get liens on them. And so, again, it's looking for a bank that has a specialty in at least one or the other. Now, where I am here in Maryland, I'm in suburban Washington, D.C., and we have tons of government contractors who do work for the federal government, so we're used to this kind of issue. And you get outside of this area, you don't see it as much. But nevertheless, you have most banks that are in this area know how to deal with that type of situation with respect to government receivables. But again, it's not an impossible issue, but it can be. There are other ways for a bank to address it. The question is, does the bank understand it in the first place? And that's where you probably need a bank that does.
Jim, would you say that this issue is common within the banking world, the bank surety claim against contractors?
Yeah, it's just, you see it, each industry has its own rules. And it's sort of like again, you'll see a lot of banks who have specialty lending units, for example, for healthcare. With healthcare, it's just a complex area to lend into, because you have to understand Medicare, Medicaid, issues, and all those kind of reimbursement rates and formulas, and all sorts of stuff. So a lot of times, in order to it gets back to a bigger issue. In order to be an effective lender, you've got to understand the business in which your customer is operating and all the issues that operate in that business. again, if you're a healthcare entity, you got to understand the healthcare industry. And so, I'm looking for a banker who will take the time and make the effort to understand that so they can understand what my financing needs are. And that's critical. If somebody who can't do that or won't do that, they're not going to be much help to you. But if you go to, I would say, generally speaking, if you go to a larger institution rather than a smaller institution, what I call like a national institution, like a Bank of America, they're going to have some people in there who will probably understand that, generally speaking, than somebody from a relatively small institution. It's not always true, but you'll probably have more success there because they have more of a depth and breadth of experience in those kind of industries.
Okay, great. I don't see any more questions for Jim, and it is the top of the hour, so we're going to conclude things here. I want to, first of all, thank you, Jim, for a great presentation. I know that I learned a lot, and I'm sure many people in our audience learned a great deal. If you'd like to speak to Jim or have additional questions that come up that you'd like Jim to answer, you can contact us here at TASA. Our phone number is on the screen, as is my email address, mhyde@tasanet.com. I'll send that around to everybody right now. As I said during the presentation, the introduction of the presentation, we will be sending out a link to the archive recording of this webinar later this afternoon. The archive recording of all of our webinars are posted in the Knowledge Center of our website, www.tasanet.com. Our next webinar will take place on June 3rd, 2010 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It will focus on nightclub security and how to reduce liability in bars, nightclubs, and concert facilities. If you'd like to attend that webinar and have not received the invitation, please send me an email at mhyde@tasanet.com, and I'll do my best to get you the invitation as soon as possible. And finally, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please email me at mhyde@tasanet.com. We do appreciate all feedback. It helps us to provide you with better programs, so please feel free to email with your comments. But also, as I said, if you have any questions for Jim, please feel free to email me them, and I will pass them on to Jim. That being said, I'm going to end the meeting now. So thank you again for attending, and thank you, Jim, for putting together this great presentation.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye-bye.